I'm Ramanda. I've written a book called The Awakening of H. It's about an experience that I had 25 years ago at the Asilomar grounds in Pacific Grove, California. The events of that week at Asilomar were such that it was beyond words for me. My aunt, who at the time when I told her I was going to Asilomar to attend the religious science event, she asked me to take notes. And I had a minister that I had taken the courses from religious science that suggested I take time to smell the flowers. With that in mind, it kind of set the tone. Plus I went there with expectation. It was my second experience at Asilomar, and I went there expecting, if you will, just maybe with a degree of expectancy would be the way to say it. And from the first day all the way through, I had one experience after another that were beyond words for me at the time. Very, very emotional because I took notes at the time, and then when I returned from this experience, I bought a tape recorder and made several tapes capturing the enthusiasm and the highlights of the week's experience at that time. And over the years, I've tried to go back and read the notes and listen to the tapes, and I was still very emotionally attached to the material. And as I would be reviewing it, I would just break out into tears as it would bring me back to the actual experience happening. And many times over the 20 or so years it took me to write the first book, I had to keep putting it down because of the emotional attachment. I was approaching Merrill Hall, which is the main speaking venue at the Asilomar grounds. And when I got within hearing distance of the front entrance, I could hear the speaker already speaking. And a fraction of a second before he spoke each word, I knew what he was going to say. And I listened for about 2 sentences, knowing exactly what each word was going to be. And I kind of flippantly said to myself, well, I know all that, I don't need to go in there. And I proceeded to walk around the grounds. And if you would have looked at me walking the grounds, you might have thought that I was inebriated, in that I would take a step to the right, then perhaps a step to the left, because I wasn't trying to go from point A to point B. I was just roaming the grounds, mostly just looking down, observing nature around me. Yes, I would look up and look at the trees and birds and things, but generally I was just looking down, humbly walking the grounds. As I got the other side of the main speaking venue, the Merrill Hall, and started circling back around the back side, I got next to or near a pine tree, and a branch was right in front of me, and I could see it peripherally as I was looking down, and I touched the branch, raised it up a bit to pass under it. Well, the moment I touched the branch, I started crying, and my inertia took me under the branch, and as I let go, I stopped crying. And I wasn't just crying, I mean the tears, I was loud, crying, bellowing, if you will. And I kind of did a double take and said, what was that? And I turned around and grabbed the branch to try to recreate what had just happened, and nothing happened. And I did it again and again, grabbing the branch, trying to recreate this, and nothing happened. So I went back to the other side of the building, sat down on some pine needles, could hear the speaker speaking a bit through the open doors, but I wasn't listening to the speaker. I was concentrating on the experience that had just happened. And I decided I wanted to just get with my thoughts, and I walked away from the building, past a main dining hall to an area, a little bit of a slope under another tree. And I sat there contemplating what had just happened. While I was doing so, the the fog started to come in off the ocean, and it was really thick, and at times there was a light dew you could see coming down, almost like a rain, very fine. After a bit, I noticed the grass on either side of me was tall, and I said it was before it was on a slope, so it was uncut grass, and the grass was bent over, dropping beads of water from this moisture coming down. But I wasn't wet, and I touched the ground under me, and it was warm, like being on a little heating pad. And I kind of go, what is it? Because looking at the moisture coming down, the fog rolling in, I should be cold and damp, and obviously damp because the grass is all wet around me and dripping with the dew, and I'm warm. After a few moments of staring out at the fog, I see fog going back in the other direction, what I thought was fog. And I kind of blink, and it went away. And again, I'm watching the fog rolling in, and this moisture coming down, and I kind of relax my eyes looking at the fog, and I see fog going against the breeze. I can feel the breeze in the back of my neck, but I'm seeing the fog going this way. Well, it wasn't until, oh gosh, more than 20 years later, thinking about the experience, that I realized that I was seeing my aura for the first time. But at the time, I just thought, well, this is no more unusual than all these other experiences I've been having that week. So after sitting there for a while, wondering about all these things, I got up and started walking over in the direction of the chapel. And as I got nearer the chapel, someone came out of the building through the fog, walked over to me, and said, "Nature wants to communicate with you. Why don't you go and hug a tree?" And he turned and walked off into the fog, and I stood there with tears coming down, because that's what I had been doing, was communicating with nature, and that's what I had been sitting under that tree, thinking about touching the branch of the other tree. It just brought it all back, and the fact that someone I hadn't even talked to just said hello, immediately started telling me that I should communicate with nature, or nature wants to communicate with me. Well, that was kind of like how the whole week was. These kind of synchronicities. People would start talking about whatever I was just thinking. If I was thinking about a particular tune, if someone turned a radio on, it would be that tune. The whole week was that way. I found that people would be looking at me, and I hadn't done anything to be conspicuous. I hadn't told anyone of the experiences I'd had that week, and people would just be staring at me. It was amazing. The whole week was that way. I remember being in line one afternoon for lunch, going to the main dining hall, and I thought, I left my meal tickets back at my motel room. And I no sooner thought that, and the lady in front of me turns around and says, "Oh my, I found my missing meal ticket. Now I have two." Because they had replaced the ticket. She notified the office that she had lost it, so they gave her another one. Well, now she had two, and I accepted it. I told her I left mine back at the motel room. I remember one of the days I was walking the grounds, I noticed a lot of feathers on the grounds. And I'm going, wow, that seems unusual that I would be seeing so many. They were the similar type feather, and didn't know what it was about. Well, that day that I noticed that I'd been seeing a lot of feathers, when I was in the administration building with a lot of other people, there was perhaps 100 people in the administration building at that time, I looked down and here's the same feathers inside the building. They were not real big, mostly white with a little bit of gray down the closest to the stem. So I still haven't figured out what that was all about. Another time I was leaving the administration building in the evening after the conclusion of the speaker speaking, and I was remembering a book that I read recently, The Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East by Baird Spalding. And in that book, they refer to the Himalayan masters surviving for many weeks on just a few grains of rice. And contemplating that and wondering how they can do that, I had a bag of pretzels in my pocket, and I reached in and took out a pretzel, and I was biting into it when I thought about this, wondering how they can sustain themselves for long periods of time on just a few grains of rice. Well, as I bit off a piece of the pretzel and pushed on it with my tongue against the roof of my mouth, I could feel something going from the roof of my mouth, going down my backside, and from my tongue going down my front side. I could feel this surge of energy. Well, at the very same time, right in front of me, I seen a three-dimensional hologram of me. And as I'm feeling this surge of energy going through my body, I'm watching it right in front of me. There's a three-dimensional grid system of this hologram with the lines going up and down being perhaps 5 times the size of the lines going horizontally. And I can see them in gold lighting up as this energy is moving through my body. It's moving through the hologram in front of me. It just lasted a second, and there were people all around me. No one else seen it. And I go, wow, what was that? And I still think about it all the time. But the story is more than just that. The next day I was in line for meals again. I think it was the lunch meal again. And I was thinking about how when the bell rings at the Asilomar grounds, people just automatically go and get in line for their meals. And I too was in line for a meal, but I wasn't hungry. So I stepped out of line and decided that I would eat when I was hungry. Well, this continued for quite some time. This was about halfway through my week experience at Asilomar. It concluded on the Saturday, a few days later. I was invited to someone's home for a party, and on my arrival there, they had tables of food out, and I didn't even have an olive. I was still full, and I had, at this point, hadn't eaten for about 4 days. And it was as though I had just left a Thanksgiving meal somewhere. I was full, no desire for any food at all. I didn't eat for over 3 weeks. I was never hungry. I drank water. I had some beer, and that's it. I didn't eat any food at all, and I was never hungry. And I was very careful, knowing that you can kind of psych yourself up, thinking that I haven't eaten and I'm not going to eat, something like that. Well, I was very careful to, if thoughts of the experience of not eating came to me, all I would do would be reaffirm that I would eat when I was hungry. I didn't want to give any reinforcement to me not eating per se, consciously. I did start eating after about 3 weeks, and I only started because I was frightened that I hadn't eaten for 3 weeks. So I opened up a can of soup and I started eating soup for my main meal, and that lasted for months. Another time I was in Merrill Hall listening to the speaker in the evening, and I was enjoying the speaker, and I had this urge to leave, and I didn't know where this urge was coming from, being that I was enjoying the speaker. And I thought, well, this whole week I've been in the flow, if you will, and that I should follow this urge. So I got up, left the meeting hall, and I didn't know where to go, and my car was parked perhaps 2 blocks away. I was off of grounds and perhaps a block off of the Asilomar grounds. I had arrived late for the meeting, for the speaking. Anyway, I didn't know where to go, just that I had this urge to leave. So I started walking in the direction of my car. Well, it wasn't long I came across a very senior gentleman that had collapsed along the side of the embankment. His legs were collapsed under him, and he was leaning against the embankment. I rushed over to him, and he explained that he was supposed to ask for help getting anywhere on the grounds, and he was very self-conscious about it, and his eyes became teary as he explained that he didn't want to ask people for assistance. And I'm guessing that he was in his 80s, perhaps, very senior and frail, certainly not over 100 pounds. Well, I realized then why I had this urging to leave Merrill Hall was to assist him. So I told him that I would go and get my car and come back and take him to where he was staying, which I did. Well, upon returning, I decided I would look for a parking place closer to the Merrill Hall. And as I got close, I got the closest parking place you could possibly get to Merrill Hall. Well, the whole week was like that, one experience after another. At the conclusion of the week, I was sitting in Merrill Hall. That's, again, the main meeting place. And I had this urge come over me that I wanted to get up and speak, that I wanted to share these experiences. And I just couldn't believe it. I thought, how outrageous of me that here there's a speaker up there speaking. There's probably 800 or 900 people there listening to the speaker, and I wanted to get up and talk. And this is very much unlike me. I've never wanted to get up and public speak. I've always been one that would sit in the back row. I never wanted to stand up or anything. And here I am wanting to get up and speak. And I had to literally hold my chair because I've been in this flow all week of just kind of going with it, if you will. Well, in that same flow, something inside me wanted to get up and share these experiences. And I'm thinking to myself, oh wow, okay, if you're going to do that, what are you going to say? And nothing comes to me. And again, my body wants to get up out of the chairs. I'm literally holding onto the chair. But again, I would look around the room and I would see people looking at me. Now, I haven't told anyone of this experience, and yet people are looking at me. Well, that evening, after the lectures had ended, I went into downtown Monterey. You know, you hear these speakers build you up, and plus all the experiences that I've had that week. I wanted to share it. I wanted to go out and talk. I wanted to dance. I went to a motel. At that time it was called the Doubletree. Upstairs there was a lounge called the Brass Rail. And I was just there a few moments, and they played a song that I really liked. And I asked someone to dance. And we're dancing, and people kept bumping into us. And I'm watching where I'm leading the lady as we're dancing, and it was kind of like being a ball in a pinball machine that we just kept getting bumped into. And after, maybe halfway through the song, the lady I was dancing with says to me, "Oh, this happens every time I dance. People always bump into me." And I thought, now I know why this experience is happening. Well, I walked her back to her seat at the conclusion of the song, and they played another one that was very similar. It was a beat kind of like the song Sailing. You can dance slow, you can dance medium fast to it. Well, I asked another lady to dance, and the dance floor was full, similar to the previous dance. And I danced that entire dance with my eyes closed. I still twirled her around a few times, and myself, never bumped into anyone. And at the conclusion, I took her back to her seat and thanked her. And I pondered that for a while and kind of wished that the First Lady would have asked me why that was happening to her. Because of course I knew that she was creating it. Well, a few minutes later, a friend of mine came in that I had known for years. We worked together. And this individual was quite colorful, if you will, in his vocabulary. And he had been, at that time, quite opinionated about our mutual supervisor and had a good deal of, let's say, colorful things to say about their relationships and what he thought of them. And to myself, I said to this individual over and over again, I love you, I love you, I love you. And over again, as he was going on and on about what he thought of our mutual supervisor. And as I kept saying, I love you to myself, his voice calmed down. The anxiety that he was demonstrating left him. He started talking in a normal, soft voice. The colorful language went away. The rest of the evening was just like that, in that he was speaking in a normal tone without the colorful language. He dropped his opinion of our mutual supervisor. And I had known this person for a few more years, working with him off and on. He was always calm and like a different person from that day forward. Going home at the conclusion of the experience at Asilomar, I stopped at a friend's home, and knocking on the door, I realized he wasn't home, and I noticed his cat nearby. I looked at the cat and I said, "Don't be afraid." And the moment I said afraid, that cat took off, ran through the courtyard, across the front lawn, and under a car. And I paused for a moment and I realized what had just happened. I said, "Don't be afraid," and the cat ran away. So I looked back at the cat and said, I love you, I love you, I love you, over and over again. And the cat came out from under the car, came right over by me, started cuddling up against my ankle and leg. And I've been to this home many times, and the cat was his owner's cat, if you will. If you tried to touch the cat, he would kind of push you away or gently bite you. Well, this time, the cat was just cuddling all over me, and I realized, and I remembered ever since, how important it is, your vocabulary, and how you can speak much more efficiently if you refrain from using denials, say things in a positive way. The experience at Asilomar that week changed me in that as I was walking the Asilomar grounds that week, I slowed down, if you will, as I walked the grounds. And that slowed down has stayed with me ever since. My life has been somewhat slower. It's like I can do whatever I'm doing. When I had my corporate job, I could be on the phone doing what I was doing. And it was like I was slowed down and everyone else is at a faster pace. I call it active meditation, if you will. And that has stuck with me these 25 years, and I practiced it all the time. The flow I was into at Asilomar continued in my life for some time. I remember a week or so after I had come back and I was back at my corporate job, I was a buyer of fruits and vegetables, mostly vegetables, for a large corporation. And one morning I was very active I was very much aware, if you will, that the market on broccoli was very active. The day before, the market had closed at around $4 a box. And that morning, within an hour or so, it was $6 to $8 and going up. I notified all my accounts that the broccoli market was very active, and if they needed any broccoli for the rest of the week, to give me their orders. I did the rest of my business, and I was getting ready to leave the office to go out and look at the product I had purchased in that growing area for that day. And I received a phone call from my largest customer, and when I answered the phone, I answered it with an affirmation that I was the finest, if you will, referring to me as the corporate buyer. And the person at the other end of the phone said, "You won't believe what I want." And I said, "Well, it doesn't matter what you want, you've got it." He said, "Well, I need a load of broccoli." And I said, "Well, when do you want it?" And he said, "Out today." Now, a load of broccoli is a semi-trailer full of broccoli. It holds about 1,000 cases of broccoli. Well, I hung up the phone and I said, I know that I called that customer first because it was my largest account and told them how active the broccoli market was. Now, at this point, it was already past the $8 point. It was going to 11, and I would have paid $11 for it. The phone rang, and I answered the phone, and it was a broccoli shipper. Asked me if I needed any broccoli, and I said, "Oh," and he said, "Well, we've got another load available, thought you might need it." And I said, "Well, when's it available?" He said, "Today." I asked, "How much?" And he said, "Well, I know the market's very active, but it closed yesterday at $4. I'll let you have it for the 4. Hung up the phone. I had my load of broccoli, didn't make a phone call for it, and I got it for yesterday's price. You see, I was still in that flow of this synchronicity going on in my life, and I love it. Probably the single point I'd like to share is that these kind of experiences are not just unique to me. Everyone can experience it. I think that's really how we were meant to live our lives, with that kind of synchronicity going on all the time. You think about something and someone will start talking about it. Just joyous synchronicity all the time. When I left the brass rail that last Friday night and wanted to celebrate this week, as I said earlier, the feeling was like being stopped up in a bottle and releasing the cork. Well, I left the brass rail and went across the street in downtown Monterey. And in those days, they had a bar upstairs. Not just a bar. It had entertainment, and it was entertainment that at that time in my life I never took a cotton to, if you will. It was heavy metal music, and quite loud. Well, for some reason that evening I was attracted to it, and I went up the stairs, and there were 2 gentlemen in front of me, and they paid their cover charge and headed towards the entrance. Well, I went up to the window where they collect the money and said, I smiled, if you will, and said hello to the lady behind the counter, and she returned the smile and said hello. Well, she didn't ask me for my money. So I proceeded to follow behind the 2 guys that were now at the entrance, and this is where they take your ticket so they know that you've paid, and they stamp your wrist to identify, I guess, that you're of age or something. Well, the 2 people ahead of me went ahead, and my turn, the fella smiled at me, said hello. I said hello, smiled, and just went in. He never asked me for my ticket, never stamped me. I went up to a table across the room, and the place was packed. And here's a table up about 4 steps with a vantage point. You could see the band, you could see over all the people dancing. It was like the best table in the establishment, and it was empty. When I say best, it was the best view. I sat there, I ordered a beer. After a while, I noticed the people at the table next to me smoking a clove cigarette. And I thought, rather than judge them, if I just breathe through my mouth, I won't smell the clove. And I smiled at them and said hello, and a moment later, someone bumped the table I was at, and I seen my beer and the ashtray sliding towards me. And one of the people at the table next to me jumped up and grabbed both before they reached me. Wonder if that would have happened had I judged them for smoking the clove cigarettes. science of mind offers, through the classes that are available, the opportunity to embrace that teaching, to bring into your life positive affirmations or positive experiences that enhance your life. And that's the reason that I want to share this, that there's classes available to teach everyone to go beyond their normal thinking and to think in a positive, affirmative way, enhancing their lives. You might ask me how I came up with the title of my book, The Awakening of H. Back in those days, my legal name was Howard, and I had always wanted to change my name. When I was a little kid, I remembered that I wanted to change my name, and as a teenager and in my 20s and 30s, I would think about wanting to change my name, but I never knew what I wanted to change it to. I would ask myself, or say to myself, different male names, and nothing set right with me. Well, about a month or so after I had this experience at Asilomar, I was reading a book about Egypt, and I got to the part where they were talking about, or had written about, the pharaohs and their names, and how they would take on the name Ra as part of their name or title, in that it was referred to as the sun god. And the pharaohs were a god, if you will, or thought of as a god back in Egypt in those days. Well, when I read that part about Ra, it was like little goosebumps all over me, tinglies. I knew that that was part of the name that I had always wanted. I didn't know if it was the front, middle, or back, but I knew it was part of the name. Well, it took several weeks, and I finally tagged man on, and I had Ra-man. And I would introduce myself to new acquaintances as Ra-man for a while, and then I stopped doing it. I was at a channeling session in someone's living room, and after the subject for the evening had ended, the person channeling had invited questions from the audience, and probably the second person, I think, had asked for a more spiritual name for themselves than the one they were given when they were born. Well, on that, half the people in the room had their hand up wanting another name. When he answered all the hands I could see, he turned in my direction and said, "The reason you haven't changed your name officially, you're still missing a piece." Well, I turned and looked behind me because I didn't have my hand up. And I looked back and pointed to myself, and he said, "Indeed, you've chosen a masculine name, but you desire to give it balance. In several languages, da, D-A, is feminine. If you tag that onto the back of the name you've selected, it'll give you the balance you're looking for." And over the next couple of weeks, I said it to myself hundreds of times, Ramanda, 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 and it fit for me. And so I changed my name legally then, and this is about 25 years ago, to Ramanda. It's not a name that I found in a book at all. I made it up myself, and for me it means God man balanced, and that's been my legal name ever since. There was a point when I was walking around the Asilomar grounds where I seen a stump off in the distance and a beam of light shining down on it, and I thought, I want to go over there and sit on that. And I started walking towards it. Well, I started to take a step and I couldn't. This tall grass was wrapped around my ankle, and I couldn't step through the tall grass. I tried several times, and I couldn't go in the direction of the stump. So I backed up, started to go another direction, again towards the stump, but from a different place, and I stepped into a pool of moisture, mud. Now this area that I'm referring to, as you enter the Asilomar grounds, is to the right. It's a depressed area in the ground. with like a pond, if you will, and lots of poison oak everywhere. Well, I remembered all of a sudden I'm trying to do something. I had set an intention at the beginning of the week that I would just go with the flow. I wouldn't try to go to a particular activity or a particular lecture or workshop. I would just wander the grounds and I would end up being where I should be. Well, now here all of a sudden I'm trying to do something, and that was out of character for that week. So I kind of backed up and went, okay, I got it. And I started looking down at the ground again and just walking around. Well, after a few moments or minutes, I realized I was on a deer path. And I looked up, and right in front of me was the stump that I had wanted to get to. And it was right there without me attempting to walk to it. Well, I took the last few steps over to it, and there were several poison oak ivies over it. Not completely over it, but over it just the same, partially. Well, I nudged that over so I could sit down and bask in the sunlight there on the stump. And I stayed there for several minutes enjoying it, and then went on about my walk. Well, I never did get poison oak, and certainly it was all over me, the jeans that I was wearing, my boots, my hands. I remember my first demonstration that week was a pair of boots. I had this pair of eelskin boots that I had purchased maybe 2 months before this Asilomar experience. And every time I would wear them, my feet would just ache. They would ache when I'm wearing them. I would take them off and my feet would ache for hours. And I had them stretched twice. Well, the Monday morning, as I started this week experience, I said a treatment, an affirmative prayer, if you will, that the boots would fit just fine. Not that they would fit, that the boots do fit just fine, that they're comfortable and I enjoy wearing them. And I had ever since after that. I never again did my feet hurt wearing the boots during the time I'm wearing them or after. Beloved Father, all that you are, I am. Indeed, all that the source is, I am. We are one, now and forever. All the qualities and attributes of the source I possess. Joyous synchronicity fills all aspects of my life. I am Christ consciousness. I am happy. I am a light of love, peace, compassion, prosperity. With joy and profound humility, I release these words, knowing that as I've spoken it, so it is.